Will North American agriculture have the fertilizer it requires for 2024 and beyond? Because there are problems in the Mississippi River. That's what we're talking about in this episode of the Business of Agriculture. Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of the Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well. But what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't. But you can now figure that out with Pattern Ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field. Then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. I've got a great topic for you today. It's something that's maybe been on your radar, maybe it has not, but it's going to impact all of us. We're talking about the Mississippi River, the biggest thoroughfare in the United States of America. It's been said that one of our great assets as a country is the Midwest, the cropland that we have, the moisture that we get, the arable land, and then also the ability to get product to and from that arable land with a big, huge navigable channel coming up the middle of our country called the Mississippi River. Well, that navigable channel has some problems right now. Maybe you've heard about this, maybe you have not. My guest is Mark Milam. He's with a company called ICIS, Independent Commodity Intelligence Services. He's a fertilizer expert. This is what he does. He advises and reads and thinks and talks and does interviews like this right here about this very topic. What the heck's going on, Mark? First off, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Well,
so you're a farm boy from Texas, and now you're in this fertilizer expertise role. First off, how does one go about becoming a fertilizer expert? Is it just like you're like me, you got a degree in agricultural economics, and somehow fertilizer markets were your thing?
Well, no, that kind of fell into this. I had farmed on my kind of own for about a decade in South Texas, but the drought finally just made it no longer feasible. It was hard, as a lot of your listeners probably know, to lose crop after crop. And so I decided I should take my talents and do something else. And I found ICIS, and they were looking for a fertilizer reporter at that time. I've been with the company nearly 11 years now. And when I joined, my joke always is that, oh, I know about fertilizers. Well, I didn't know exactly everything about fertilizers. I've learned quite a bit over the last 11 years. And so what we mainly do is we track the movement of product, a lot of it through the New Orleans NOLA barge system is the main way. So that's how we get into this river conversation. And so we track the daily trades. We provide weekly assessments of the deals that have been concluded, and we publish reports. And you can find us on ICIS.com and go from there if you're interested to know more about the company. But we have a large fertilizer. I'm sorry, we don't have a large fertilizer team. We have a small fertilizer team that covers a large portfolio. We cover the whole global markets. I cover the U.S., some Canada, and some into Mexico. But my main focus is here on the U.S. That's the market I know.
Yeah. And so for 11 years, it's been your job to dig into fertilizer issues. And we had this a few years ago with the whole supply chains were disrupted, global economies had been disrupted and really thrown off course with COVID shutdowns. You know, all of a sudden you couldn't sell pickup trucks because we didn't have chips, and you couldn't get toilet paper. I mean, the things were a damn mess. You and I both know that. And fertilizer and crop inputs were also one of those things. And we got through it. You know, like there was questions to me, hey, you keep up with what's going on in ag, or we're going to have food. I said, yeah, we're going to have food. And probably it's been a little. What is different now? We're through all of that, aren't we? And then B, what's different now?
Yeah, we're through that. And in fertilizers, you know, even though there was a lot made about it, the supply didn't get cut off as much as other products did. You know, there wasn't the shortages. What happened was the market probably took a little advantage of people being concerned and the prices escalated. Then when we got to a little bit further, there's been some geopolitical events that caused even more concern. And so, prices have come down considerably year on year. And what we're seeing right now is that fertilizer is back to being what farmers would call more affordable. That, the ratio to what's cost to raise your crop and versus your nutrients and all your other inputs has gotten more balanced. And the prices on crops, as you've seen, have been fairly good. They're not, skyrocketed like we've seen in past years, but they've been fairly positive. So that's where we are. Crop prices are good. Fertilizer is more affordable. What we've seen over the last probably 4 weeks, at least in the nitrogen market in the U.S., is prices are still coming down a little bit more. And so overall, that bodes well. And we just saw yesterday that the USDA is saying there's going to be a lot more corn yield than we thought there was going to be. So all in all, that's shaping up pretty good for the fertilizer market. I will say the downside that's going on right now is there's this terrible drought across a huge swath of the country, and it's left the Mississippi really low.
Yeah.
And that's gonna be a big issue coming up.
All right, I want to get to the Mississippi, but before I do, let's follow up on a couple of the statements you just made, Mark. You said that we were at a more normal situation, meaning prices have normalized, supply has normalized. For prices normalized, generally supply needs to come back into where it fits, meets the demand, et cetera. So how long were things screwy? 2 years?
About a good 2-year period. It would kind of coincide just along with the way the COVID situation was unfolding. So, I guess we're talking late 2019 and it carried over into, all through that 19 and through 20, probably a little bit longer than 2 years because it floated a little bit into last year as well. And like I say, one thing that we didn't see, we didn't lose supply. Supply just got really expensive.
Yeah. Right. We had fertilizer, but we paid out the nose through it. Do you think, one of the big things, I work with a group called Extreme Ag, and I produce their videos and their podcasts and whatnot. And these are some really forward-thinking farm guys. And one of my guys said in an interview with me, he said, it's sad that it took this supply constriction to do it, but we're getting a lot more judicious with our fertilizer, and we should have been here a long time ago. Don't you think that's still the case? I mean, you've got a farm background. I've got a farm background. In the old days, you wouldn't just fling the shit everywhere. It was fairly inexpensive. You put it everywhere. We're using it better on a per bushel produced. Aren't we better with fertilizer inputs on a per bushel produced, more efficient, I should say, than we've ever been?
I believe so. I'm not actively involved in it, but when it's been about 11 years since I've been, but it was starting to trend that way. And part of that was out of cost. Now what we're seeing is it's also out of environmental concern. Our farmers, people have always not thought of farmers as being environmentalists, but they're kind of the original environmentalists. They want to care for their land. And if you can do that by reducing your nutrient input, because we know that, the soil needs its own kind of way of taking care of itself. But the crops that we grow nowadays with the seeds, that the way that they have been, genetically bred, that they need to also be fed pretty good. They need to be fed. I remember the crops that we grew in the 80s didn't need to be fed like the crops that I grew in the early 2000s. So that's the kind of conflict. But I think what we're getting better on efficiency, and we're getting better on looking at ways to do things, a little bit better. Some of these things that I've been hearing with people doing these skipped applications, instead of putting it all out at once, like was the tradition of my grandparents and me for a while, you split that up and it works better. So yeah, there is that trend. And I think it's just going to continue, even if the costs stay favorable for farmers, that's just better for the bottom line for a grower.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we're using less per bushel produced, but we're also producing mega bushels, on a per acre basis. Just since you left the game, we're not at double, but we're probably up a strong, 25% in the last decade in terms of yield per acre. What's the deal then with the Mississippi? What are we talking about here? Is it just because it's dry? Because we've had this prolonged dry spell throughout the middle part of the country, and the Mississippi is way down. Is that the only issue?
Well, that's really the primary issue. we've gone through this period where if you look at the map on the drought monitor, there's just really dark red all around the Mississippi watershed. And we all know it was a hot and dry summer. I, for one, was surprised that yields were not as impacted as they have been, but good for everybody who got away with what was a really intense summer. So we need to get significant rainfall. The Mississippi is not as bad as it was the year prior. Take, for example, St. Louis. I read yesterday that St. Louis is about 5 feet right now, when last year it was like 0.6. So we're in better condition, but it's still very low. And what we're going to need is some significant rainfall. We need a good wet winter across the north, and we need good rainfall in the south. We're going to get some. There's been some recently. It helped a little bit, but what's going to mainly happen is if you look at states like right there along like Louisiana, and some of the other Arkansas, and as you go up there, they're very dry. So when that first rain comes, it's going to be sucked in by the soil for a good bit. You're not going to get the runoff immediately. So this is a situation that's going to take several weeks, if not, into early Q1 before we see a good resolution, I think.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the weather and also some the geography you're talking about. But before I do that, you said St. Louis 5 feet down to 0.6 feet. You're talking about the water level. When I drive across the bridge there where this, and you look out and you see the St. Louis Gateway Arch, you're talking about the depth of the river averages less than 1 foot right now?
No. Right now it's at about a 5 foot mark.
Oh,
last year at this time, it was 0.6.
Like last year at this time, you could have literally walked from Illinois to Missouri.
Well, I haven't been to that actual spot. That's my bad. I've never been there, but I guess if you're telling me you could, yeah, there was, I don't know if you saw some of the pictures last year. It looked like they had just sucked all that water out of there. There was big, huge sand. Well, the Mississippi, one thing people forget, Mississippi has a lot of sandbars. Yeah. And so once it gets down, all those sandbars started coming up. I saw some really shocking images. I've seen some this year too. There's parts there had been parts where the sandbars were coming up, in like what I call the mid Mississippi area. But yeah, it's better than it was last year, but it's not where it needs to be. It needs to, hasn't put an estimate on how much rainfall, but if the 2 to 3 inches that fell through the watershed helped it slightly, then I'm thinking that we're going to need quite a bit. I know people don't want to hear that they're going to have wet holidays, but we kind of need it to be wet, ending of this month, all through December, 1st of January, and that would really help it. Because right now, this is something you may want to get into further. It's not impacting the fertilizer market that much because we're at a slow period. But you wait and we get another 6, 7, 8 weeks. And if it's like this is going to really have a big impact. We've seen this happen before. And the main casualty, I guess, in this deal is when it goes crazy is those farmers who haven't locked in their nutrients because the prices are going to shoot up.
Yeah, so I want to cover where we are and now going on prices. Before I do that, I want to remind my viewers and my listeners, if you are in the business of agriculture, you have questions. My buddy Rob Syke founded a company called AgVisor Pro to help people get answers. It's essentially an information exchange. It's a app you can put on your phone. So put this app on your phone, AgVisor Pro, and you need answers. It's it's like social media without the bullshit. It's you need information, you get questions, you have questions, you get answers. AgVisor Pro. It's an app. You can put it on your phone. There's a lot of cool stuff happening there. He started groups. So like all of a sudden, if you're in the fertilizer business, there will be a fertilizer group within AgVisor Pro. It's a place to exchange information, get answers to questions you have. It's amazing. Go and put it on your phone. AgVisor Pro. Put an app on your phone. Okay. So you just said something really interesting. First off, the Mississippi is really low, and it is the conduit that carries all sorts of barge traffic and the conduit of getting us our fertilizer here. Now, there's rail and there's truck, and I want to go through all that, but why is the Mississippi so critical for fertilizer? First off, we got fertilizer that comes from Canada, right? And it doesn't come via the Mississippi. We've got both coasts. So why is the Mississippi so critical in this whole thing? Is it just because it puts it closer to where it needs to get used?
Well, the answer is kind of a multi-part. The first thing is you can you can take so much more volume at one time. And so it's cost efficient. Two, it's when there's not the low water situation, it's a more steady and reliable form of transportation. You know, the transit from New Orleans to, let's say, St. Louis generally takes the same amount of time. You don't have some of the issues that you find that the other means like rail or trucking can come across. The second reason is, like you mentioned, is that it puts it right near the ports or the terminals where it goes from off the barge into a facility, so then to a warehouse, and then the farmers either take it or the retailers. So that's out of the convenience of it. And it's just become it's the farmers in this country do. Routines are a big part of this industry. And so like farmers plant corn and put ammonia, fertilizer market traders want to put their product on barges and move it. It's just always been that way. And, you know, there's a lot of times where the rail issues have presented challenges to fertilizer industry over the last couple of years, and trucking has become more expensive in the last several years. And I keep mentioning, you just can't move as much and as reliable overall.
Okay, so that is all of interest. The river is down. Is barge traffic stopped, or is it just it's not as prevalent because of the sand barges and things like that? In other words, are there barges when I drive through St. Louis tomorrow, which I will be driving through St. Louis tomorrow? Will I see barges?
You should see barges unless there's something happened today, they'll stop them. But yeah, we've seen urea barges being sold this week for November transit. So those are moving. I understand there's soy and corn moving down the river right now. I'm not as involved in that part of the industry, but I understand that it's moving. What's going on though is that the loads have been cut by like 2/3. So you're moving less. And it's just
you mean the actual barge has less product in it because of weight, because of displacement, because of the depth of the river?
Yes, correct. Yes. When the river gets low, then you have to make them lighter. And so everything's just less filled and going slower. Okay. From what I last heard, it was adding anywhere from, like, depending on where you're going, 3 to 7 days extra transit time right now because of the low water levels. And then I think your listeners are going to be aware that we're facing the upcoming river closure, which I expect when we get our next big cold snap, that, you know, the cold front that comes across this country will probably start shutting down the northern side. And then that will just cascade down as the weather gets colder and more severe in the next couple of weeks. Because winter's coming.
Yeah, winter's coming. And, you know, you spoke about this. I'm in Northeast Indiana. I am in the Mississippi River watershed. My farm ground drains into Clear Creek, which then drains into the Wabash River, which goes over and drains down to the Ohio, which goes to the Mississippi. And we're dry, absolutely dry. You know, it's one of the drier falls we've seen following a really dry June. So anything that we got in July and August, the crops just sucked it up. We're also having record crops. But yeah, I agree with you. We need one of those winters that's ugly. We need one of those here. You know, we're recording this, you and I, early mid-November. We need it to get gray and rain about 1/2 inch. And then the next day, rain about 3/10 of an inch. And the next day, we need one of those slow soaker, ugly ass, gray, wet fall going into winters. Like, we need to get to where it's just like, oh God, it rains every day. We need that because you've got no moisture down at the 1 foot and 2 foot level, let alone you won't get water going into the Mississippi watershed until we've saturated the ground. Well, the ground's nowhere close to saturated.
Right. You need what we used to call in Texas, because we don't get very cold, a slushy winter. You know?
Yeah. So anyway, assuming this does or does not happen, we're already kind of late. And I think that's the big point here. We're already a little late. And, you know, here I'm recording this on November 10th. We're wet. So, I mean, we're not wet. We're dry. And so we need to be wet, but that's not going to fix anything immediately. Are the fertilizer warehouses full, or are they sitting there on real low supply?
Well, that's a good question. That's one I'm kind of trying to judge. At one point, we had a really good refill program on almost all the products. So retailers and inventory levels were up. Now we've seen some good post-harvest applications already before that last cold snap came across the U.S. There, we were starting to see where the acreage had been completed. Potash was going down, phosphate, some ammonia, like in places like Missouri, was starting to be applied. So it was starting to go. So there has been some flow out of them. I think right now it's in my position that we are very well positioned because of this refilling effort and product positioned earlier this year to handle everything that we need for post-harvest applications and likely start the beginning of spring. But there's going to be a lot more needs that need to be covered starting, everybody will kind of snooze through the holiday, but when January comes, that's going to wake up and demand's going to ratchet up. So we will quickly exhaust, in my opinion, our supply come early Q1. And that's where this river situation kind of lingers over us. Is she going to be nice and let us roll along smoothly, or is it going to be real difficult and people are going to be scrambling to get product, especially more up in the northern states, starting about where you are at? That's where, it kind of gets farther in the what I call the barge chain. And so that starts making it tight. There was a situation last year where there was some river issues that people, I understand, in the northern states, we're talking the Dakotas and further up, then even into Canada, didn't get some of their supply. They were a little bit tight because, we had dryness last year. So people don't want to see that little bit expand into a huge major issue.
Uh-huh. So what about then, you said things ratchet up in January, let's say. Here we are recording this second week in November. If we have this kind of ugly, gray, wet time and the whole country gets it and we get wet and we replenish the waterway, can we catch up? Can the supply catch up between now and New Year's Day? If we get the right. I mean, in other words, could December all of a sudden those barges are full again because we've caught the water up?
No, because we'll have the river closure. So what will happen is this will start to when I say ratchet it up, I should explain a little bit better. The eagerness and the strategy undertaken by people will start to build in January, going into February. They'll probably be we'll start to see commitments being made, but until that river opens up again fully, and that all depends on the weather, but sometime late February-ish is generally the time period where things start to flow. Then it'll be tight till then, and there'll probably be some concerned people. There'll be some anticipation, some wondering, what am I going to do? But if the river is full or has increased in level, the fertilizer industry can move product very quickly into place. And they'll also start to realize that there's going to be a lot of demand. So they'll start to undertake paying for some rail shipments. Okay. They'll undertake paying for some truck shipments. They'll get enough, as they always say, get enough just in place to get it going. And then kind of as everything starts to get underway for the spring season, get that product quickly moved in. Because like I say, my opinion is we get enough post-harvest applications, that's going to carry people to start their planting. The guys who are putting ammonia down aren't going to put any more down until they start getting the seed down. Same with these people, I believe, who are banding in the potash and the phosphate right now. That's their whole plan. They're going to put it down, let it overwinter, hope that they come back and the ground's been, nicely saturated and hit it and planted, and then wait and then do a second, the side dressing. That's where we're starting to see more of these split applications. You don't want to, someone said to me a while back, and it's an old saying, but you don't want to put all those nutrient eggs in one basket.
Yeah. Well, and that's from an environmental standpoint. Yeah. Going out and flinging out tons and tons of it in in the fall and expecting it to still be there come May or June is ridiculous. So there's going to be more, like you said, we're getting smarter about multiple applications of fertility because then it's not wasted. What about price then? So, if I'm sitting here, I'm thinking this stuff's going to get higher. Is now the buying opportunity?
Well, the way as I mentioned, the way I've seen the trend over about the last 4 weeks is that at least on the nitrogen side and pretty much all the products except for ammonia have been under some pricing pressure. Ammonia has been lifting because they believe there's going to be a good amount of demand. So producers and distributors aren't willing to back off of that right now. They kind of got a price idea in their head on that, and they're going to ride that to spring. And they may be correct on that, but everything else has been on a kind of downward trend for the last couple of weeks. That said, I get feedback from the market that many people think that we're reaching near a floor on the products right now.
You think we're at our low? We're at close to our low.
If we're not at our low, we're close to it. We saw November barges trade this week for 342 to 345 a short ton, which was down a little bit more. And I don't know if they're going to drop any further than that, because at one point there was a thought that 350 was kind of a market low. We've come under that now this week. And so that may be where we're at. Now, this market always surprises you. So,
yeah.
but that's my feeling right now where we're at this time. And we're, like I say, we're in early November. Things are about to slow down. River's about to close. So
let's talk about the river. Wasn't it a couple of years ago there was talk between, like the National Corn Growers or the fertilizer trade groups? There was talk, Mark, that everyone wanted some infrastructure improvements, putting in locks or doing some dredging. That was talk a few years ago, and you're the expert on this, not me. Did we ever do that? Can we repair our way out of the low Mississippi? Is part of this problem humans, not just the weather?
Well, no, I don't get that sense that it's something for once that us as humans can be necessarily blamed for. Part of that whole effort, the way I understood it, was because people were concerned about the aging infrastructure. A lot of it's old. So that was my understanding of where they're doing it. And I see that they have done some things, and you know what? I'll give this side of the government a little bit of kudos. At least they keep the dredging, what do they call it? The dredging schedules pretty consistent. They recognize that, it's very important, and it's just like anything else. I compare it to like all of a sudden you want to repair a major interstate in one of our big cities. It's really hard to just stop everything and say, oh, we're going to repair this. So they've done some stuff on the Ohio, and if I remember correctly, they've done some stuff on the Arkansas River, but as far as making too much advancement on stuff on the Mississippi, that has not happened yet. And, it's my thought that they may have missed their opportunity during these low water periods.
Yeah.
They should be ready to jump on them. But, we'll have to, this will be more like a system that we see a lot in this country. They'll take care of those repairs as they're necessary, kind of piecemeal it. It does all need to be upgraded. I don't think it wouldn't help with low water situation. Just low water is low water.
Low water is low water, but there's some things that have needed to be. We've been talking about this in agriculture for a few years. Some lock systems, and I'm clearly no barge barge expert, but it seems to me. Then the next one is, what about a workaround? If we've had this issue for a while, is it time to just there's less railroad rail miles than there used to be, back in the 40s, 50s, there was more small rails. Is it time to bring back rail? Is it time to do a work around the Mississippi?
Well, I had thought about that quite a bit because, when you think about barges, they're quite an antiquated form of transportation. But,
they're still not pulled by a mule on a towpath. That's the only difference, is that it used to be a mule on a towpath in the canal system. One of those ones down here. So other than that, it's to say it's antiquated. Hell, you're going back to Huck Finn, man.
But
wait, Mark. I know you're about my age. If you are younger than 30, you have no idea the reference I just made, because Huckleberry Finn has been banned from your library. It's a Mark Twain novel, and it centers around Hannibal, Missouri, on the Mississippi River. So there you go, a little literary cliff note for you. Go ahead.
Oh no, oh gosh, now because you made me think about the bucket. No, we were saying it's kind of an antiquated form of transportation, and I've thought about it a lot. I'm like, what could be done better? And don't really see an immediate answer. When the railroads, kind of consolidated, in the 80s, that took away a lot of what you're talking about, the smaller railroads operating and stuff, and made the less tracks everywhere. But the railroad industry does a pretty good job of serving fertilizers, but they have so many competing interests. Fertilizer isn't the big money maker for them. I mean, if the industry eventually switched more over to there, they could probably work out a more favorable agreement. The railroads probably would, try to service their needs a little bit more than they do some of the other industries that, pay the bills at Union Pacific or, CSX and all those.
Isn't it interesting that we've heard this before, like with the whole Canada ag situation, where the agricultural entities in Western Canada scream bloody murder and say that there's two big rails in Canada, four big rails in the United States, that they were giving them less preferential treatment and putting preferential treatment to other industries, I don't know, fuel or car manufacturing, I don't know what the hell it was, that paid more. And I'm like, well, you would think it'd be so much per ton per rail mile, but it's not that way.
I'm not sure exactly how they actually do the billing on the railroad industry. I've always been told by people in the industry that it's just a lot more expensive than taking it by barge. And in some cases, it's depending on where you're located, it's more expensive than trucks. Trucks have more accessibility. They don't haul as much though again. So it's kind of, the industry's kind of gotten itself in a situation where when these kind of means of logistics. And one year we saw where truck situation was messed up because of fuel and no drivers. The railroads were having scheduling problems and the Mississippi was low. This was a couple years ago and the industry was about to lose its mind, but they just kind of held their breath and waited for it to pass. But it's probably time for them to think. That's why I think you see more of these new facilities that are being built or being talked about. We're more in places like Iowa or places in Louisiana where they kind of a little bit closer to where the actual needs of the farmers are.
Yeah. Now, what kind of facilities are you talking about there? You're talking about a different means of transportation hub system?
No, I'm talking about like when they talk about building these new fertilizer facilities.
Oh, manufacturing.
Manufacturing. That's why I think you're seeing it more trying to be located closer to the source of their customers.
Yeah. Yeah, it used to be that we thought as long as you can transport it, why have it here? But now it's like maybe this stuff here. All right, so get me out of here, Mark. And by the way, is that going to fix our problem?
Is what going to fix our problem?
Having production facilities in the Corn Belt going to should obviously reduce our dependence on the Mississippi River.
Well, it would help reduce the logistic pressures that come up from time to time, like we're talking about. There's also the producer's perspective of that it'll cost farmers less to have locally sourced, material, even though I see it kind of being sold for the same prices, kind of, market value, what time the market is. So that's not necessarily come true. And also it's just going to be, it's more secure. At least if you're a grower and there's a plant within 100 miles, if everything goes terrible on the Mississippi, the trains are all slowed down and you can't get a truck, you can at least drive somewhere over there and get your what do they call them, the half-ton truck, loaded up with some urea or some potash and then get it home. So
it might take a few trips.
It might take a few trips, but like I say, just sometimes I lived in an area down in deep South Texas where we didn't necessarily weren't close to any production and weren't close to any kind of outlet for it. So we would always see our fertilizer supply, what I would call third-handed. It would start somewhere, like in San Antonio. It would come down to a retailer, then it would come to our local guy, and then it would come to us. And over time, I know that a lot of those chains have kind of tightened, and so you don't have as many of those options as much. And more, one of the cries that we hear in fertilizer from farmers, and this might be a topic for later, is that there's not as many options. You don't have as many companies to go to buy your inputs anymore. And fertilizer being one of those, the market is really condensed. And when there's issues, these issues become more profound because there's less avenues.
Yeah, and that's obviously, the consolidation issue once again, that you have fewer suppliers, and when there's a bottleneck here, then it causes more pain for more people because there's more people dependent on that one place that has the bottleneck. So let's say the Mississippi, say we don't get that ugly, gray, wet year that we need. Say the Mississippi, you and I are talking a year from now, and the Mississippi is down to half a foot. Do we just start doing permanent workarounds? Like you said, building production facilities for fertilizer in the Corn Belt and making it so that we don't need the Mississippi? Do you see that happening?
No, I really don't, because the time it takes to build a facility, the investment money that needs to be committed is the biggest barriers to seeing new production facility. And I'm one of the minority opinion that right now we have enough production in this country to satisfy our needs. Now, people will talk about, well, there's the export opportunities, but when we look at what we're really talking about, taking care of the U.S. farmer and our agricultural economy, I think that we're doing pretty well. I mean, people argue different points on that. So that's not really the answer. We just need to hope that we have a little bit more sustained weather patterns that are more typical, and we get our typical rainfall, and we have to be concerned about all of that, because it's a bigger picture. It's not just for fertilizer that this Mississippi run low. It affects the crops that are being moved around, and it affects a lot of things. It has a ripple effect beyond. When people hear about it, they're like, oh, the poor farmers. But when you start making the farmers poor, then everyone else is going to pay kind of down the line. So
I guess we're going to leave it right there. That's a very great wrap up. You just took my job away from me. His name's Mark Milam. I connected with him on LinkedIn. You can do the same thing. His company is Independent Commodity Intelligence Services. He's a senior editor for fertilizer for them. He's got whatever title you want to give him. But the point is he lives and dies and talks about fertilizer. And I'm glad you came on here. This is an interesting topic. And it's kind of like let's see. It's kind of like that's where we are. Like, let's see. And I think your predictions are dead on. The weather will probably be there, and we'll say, oh boy, we worried about nothing. But we've worried about this before. We've had this issue, and there's going to be a little bit of tightness. You and I both predicted we might be at a bottom right now on fertilizer as we're talking here on November 10th. So anyway, thanks for being here, Mark.
You're welcome. I've been glad to be on, and nice to meet you, and hope to talk to you again soon.
I'm sure you will. A reminder also, dear listener, go and check out AgVisor Pro. Put it on your phone. It's free. It's an app, and you can just toy around with it. And you know what? Maybe it can be of service to you. Share this with somebody that will enjoy it. And please, if you haven't subscribed already, subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's free. And you can also watch, if you want to watch my stuff, on Acres TV. Till next time, thanks for being here. I'm Damian Mason, and this is The Business of Agriculture. Hey, thanks for being here. This episode of The Business of Agriculture was brought to you by Pattern Ag. You've heard me talk about Pattern Ag because I think it's a pretty cool concept. New technology that allows you to predict the problems you're going to have and therefore treat them before those problems cost you money. What kind of problems am I talking about? Pests and disease. Things like cordon rootworm, sudden death syndrome, cyst nematode, and a whole bunch of other bad things that happen out there in the field that can cost you money. Guess what? Pattern Ag will let you find out ahead of time if the disease or the pest pressure is there, and therefore you're treating it before it costs you any money. What a great concept. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to learn more about their product, their technology, how it can make you money, save you yield, and also where you can find a rep that can come out there and do the work for you. Pattern.ag.